In today's lesson, we're going to talk about how to integrate your sources into your argumentative research essay. But before I actually jump into the PowerPoint, I want to remind you of this index of templates. So we looked at this last week when we talked about counter arguments, but it is also very useful for you to use when plugging in your research to support your own unique argument. So, of course, some things may need to be tweaked, like you're not allowed to make I statements in your argumentative research paper. So, if you find a template that uses I statements, then you need to adjust that template in order to fit the assignment guidelines for the argumentative research paper. So, but this is like very useful. So, if you remember, like, when talking about the meal plan, you open with your main idea or topic sentence, and then you have evidence and analysis. So these templates can help you with the evidence and analysis portion of your body paragraphs, especially if you maybe feel like you're being a little bit repetitive, or like in how you bring up that research, or if you're just unsure as you begin the writing process, if you're unsure as to how you want to integrate like how to integrate it, or if you're just like not confident in integrating the research, like these can help you, okay? So as you can see, it's a 19-page document, and some things are relevant to what we're doing and some things aren't. Just find what works best for you and for what fits at the assignment guidelines for the argumentative research essay. And this is right here. Here we are under week 14, templates for implementing sources. It's also in I think it's in this week's, nope, it's in the research resources block as well, like up right there. So, but it's also under week 14 where, so you don't have to go like scrolling around for it. So let's go ahead and jump into the actual lesson. So in today's lesson, we'll talk about integrating your research into your argumentative research essay by delving into direct quotes, summaries, and paraphrasing. So just a reminder, you must always use in-text citation and create a works cited entry for all your sources. So every time you reference a source's ideas or words, you must have an in-text citation. And every works cited entry should have a corresponding in-text citation, and every in-text citation should have a corresponding works cited entry. So here is a list of reasons why you might use direct quotes, paraphrases, and summaries. So, most often, people quote, paraphrase, or summarize sources in order to provide support for claims or to add credibility to your own writing. So again, the argumentative research essay is your unique argument, and you're using your sources to back up your argument, okay? It's just like if you were to go up to someone who is smoking a cigarette and you said, hey, smoking is bad. Okay, smoking is bad is your unique argument. And then if you wanted that person to believe you, you would say smoking is bad because X% of people get lung cancer from smoking. Okay, so that would be the research that is backing up your claim and thus adding credibility to your writing. So you might also paraphrase, quote, or summarize a source in order to refer to work that leads up to the work you are doing now, to give examples of several points of view on a subject, to call attention to a position that you wish to agree or disagree with, to highlight a particularly striking phrase, sentence, or passage by quoting the original, to distance yourself from the original by quoting it in order to cue readers that the words are not your own, or to expand the breadth or depth of your writing. So this slide lists the foundational steps that you need to take before you can actually insert research into your argumentative research essay. So before you quote, paraphrase, or before you insert quotes, paraphrases, and summaries into your paper, you first need to read the entire text, noting the key points and main ideas. You need to be able to summarize the source in your own words, what the single main idea of the essay is. Paraphrase important supporting points that come up in the essay. Consider any words, phrases, or brief passages that you believe should be quoted directly. So again, these are steps you need to take before you actually insert the research into your essay. And this, you kind of do a lot of this with the annotated bibliography. So the best way to integrate sources into your essay is through signal phrases. So again, signal phrases could be the author's name, or their name and their job, or like the book they wrote, the article they wrote, anything that could establish the author's credibility and authority. So in order to integrate sources, you should use signal phrases, and you should avoid dropped quotations. So dropped quotations are when you just insert a quote into your essay without a signal phrase, without any sort of contextualizing information. So it's just from the beginning of the sentence to the end of the sentence is just a quote. That's very confusing and it's very jarring for your reader. You should establish authority through signal phrases. You should also introduce summaries and paraphrases with signal phrases. And then, as always, put source material in context. Do not assume that the person reading your essay has read the same sources as you. So when you're just kind of talking about your sources without giving any background information, it's going to be very confusing and alienating for your reader. So now let's get into like a little bit more of the nitty-gritty. So let's first talk about direct quotes. So direct quotes enclose a source's exact phrasing / language in quotation marks. This can be an entire sentence or just a fragment from a sentence. The exclusion of quotation marks falsely implies that the phrasing / language is your own. This is considered plagiarism, even if you provided an in-text citation in a works cited entry for the source. Use direct quotes sparingly. So, when you are directly quoting a source, you're using the source's exact language, which means you have quotation marks around that exact language, and then you should also have an in-text citation, okay? Just having quotation marks around the exact language is not enough. You must have quotation marks and an in-text citation, okay? If you do not have quotation marks around a source's exact language, but you do have an in-text citation, that is still considered plagiarism, okay? Because when you don't include quotation marks, but you do have an in-text citation, you're telling your reader this is the source's ideas, but my words, okay? So by not having quotation marks around a source's exact language, you're telling your reader that these are your words when they're not. So even having an in-text citation, even if you have an in-text citation, it's still considered plagiarism. And then this last point here with use direct quotes sparingly, that doesn't mean reference your sources sparingly. That means have a nice balance between direct quotes, paraphrases, and summaries. Okay, your paper should not be just a bunch of quotes from your sources. Like an argumentative research paper, as we've talked about a few weeks ago, is it's just your unique argument, and you're using your sources to back your unique argument up. If you're just quoting your sources, like, that's not very useful for your reader. Like, your reader can just go ahead and read the sources instead of reading your paper, okay? So when to use direct quotes? When language is especially vivid or expressive, when exact wording is needed for technical accuracy, when it is important to let the debaters of an issue explain their positions in their own words, when the words of an authority lend weight to an argument, when the language of a source is the topic of discussion. So here I have, this is from your textbook, a writer's reference. And at the top here we have the original source. And then this first example here is an example of plagiarism. And this example of plagiarism, the text highlighted in blue is the exact language from the original source material. But there are no quotation marks around it, but there is an in-text citation. And then down here, we have the exact language from this source in quotation marks with an in-text citation. So again, this example up here is plagiarism, even though there is an in-text citation, because there are no quotation marks around the borrowed language, okay? So when you're quoting your source, when you're using your source's exact words, you need to have quotation marks around those exact words, okay? So sometimes when you're quoting your source, you like the first chunk of words and you like the last chunk of words, but you don't really need what's in the middle. And when you need to condense a quoted passage, meaning you want to skip over some words, you need to insert an ellipsis. And this right here is an example of an ellipsis. That's 3 periods, basically. And the ellipsis indicates that you've left words out. When you're using an ellipsis, you need to make sure what remains is a grammatically correct, coherent sentence, and you cannot use the ellipsis to change the meaning of the piece of text that you're quoting, okay? Because that violates academic integrity. So let's look at an example. So here we have a quote. Let's look at this quote at the top. In Mississippi, legislators passed, quote, a ban on bans, a law that forbids local restrictions on food or drink, end quote. The writer has omitted the words municipalities to place before local restrictions to condense the quoted material. So let's go back up here to this quote. The original sentence said, a ban on bans, a law that forbids municipalities to place local restrictions on food or drink. So this quote is leaving out the phrase municipalities to place. So because it's just not necessary, right? Like, we can assume that the sentences before this, like, made this phrase clear already, so we can skip over it. But we can't just skip over it without indicating that we did. And how you indicate you skipped over some words in your quote is by inserting the ellipsis. Okay? And again, this is still a grammatically correct, coherent sentence, even though this information was taken out. If you want to leave out one or more full sentences, use a period before the 3 ellipsis dots. So here we have a quote, individuals have limited willpower to defer immediate gratification for longer-term health benefits. And that's the end of the sentence, so we have a period because it's the end of the sentence. And then we're indicating that we're skipping over another sentence here with the ellipsis. and then we can pick back up as normal, okay? Ordinarily, do not use an ellipsis mark at the beginning or at the end of a quotation. Your readers will understand that the quoted material comes from a longer passage, so such marks are not necessary. The only exception occurs when you have dropped words at the end of the final quoted sentence. In such cases, put 3 ellipsis dots before the closing quotation mark and parenthetical reference. Make sure omissions and ellipsis marks do not distort the meaning of your source. Another form of punctuation that you can use in order to indicate that your quote has been altered is brackets. So brackets are like this symbol right here. So it's kind of like a parentheses, except it's straight. Brackets allow you to insert your own words into quoted material as a means of bringing clarity to the quote. Brackets are also used to keep a sentence grammatical in context. So let's first look at our example here. So, brackets allow you to insert your own words into quoted material to clarify a confusing reference or to keep a sentence grammatical in your context. You also use brackets to indicate that you are changing a letter from capital to lowercase or vice versa to fit into your sentence. In the following example, the writer inserted words in brackets to clarify the meaning of help. So here we have our quote. A new poll finds people are split on how much the government should do to help find solutions to the national health crisis, and most draw the line at attempts to force healthier eating. So we have find solutions to the national health crisis in brackets. And that's because in this quote, what help is referring to is not clear, right? Because your reader is only getting this small chunk of your source. So help, what this quote means by helping is clarified some like earlier on or somewhere else in the source. But we, the reader of this essay, aren't getting that information. So the person pulling this quote added their own words to clarify what is meant by help. Okay? So if you are going to insert your own words into a quote, you put them in brackets. And that indicates to your reader, hey, these are my words. This did not show up in the original quote. But you only do that to clarify a confusing reference. Like if the quote says it or she or him, or another word where it's not clear what it or who she or who he or who they are. And also, you would use brackets like if you need to change the tense. So let's say you're writing in the past tense, but your source is writing in the present tense, and you need the tenses to match. So you would use brackets to indicate that you have made the quote grammatically, like fit the grammatical structure of your paper. Also, when brackets are used, like here we have the word or the phrase, like the word sick, S-I-C, to indicate a grammatical error. So when you're quoting something, and this is not going to happen in any of your sources because they've been peer-reviewed and edited and they are grammatically sound. But if you're quoting something that has a grammatical error, don't fix it, okay? You would add sick in brackets in order to indicate like, hey, this is grammatically incorrect, and that's how it appears in the source. Like this sick is indicating that effects is incorrect and it should be affects, but changing it to affects is not ethical. So you need to indicate like, yes, I know this is wrong, but that's how it appears in the source, and that's what you do with sick. But that's not really something you're going to run into. So now let's talk about summarizing and paraphrasing. Summarizing and paraphrasing are when you put information from a source into your own words. So summarizing and paraphrasing are on the surface quite similar, but when you get down to it, they are quite different. So we're going to focus on like the differences between the two. So, we've had a whole lesson on summaries. You summarized your articles already, but a summary condenses information from a source. When you summarize, you are conveying the author's main ideas / points in your own words and doing so in far fewer words than the author. So when you're summarizing, you're basically taking, like you did with your annotated bibliographies. You summarized 15-page articles in 2 sentences, okay? So summaries are very much a condensed form of your source, okay? So when to summarize? When a passage is lengthy and you want to condense a chapter to a paragraph or a paragraph to a sentence. When you want to state the source's main ideas simply and briefly in your own words. When you want to compare arguments or ideas from various sources. When you want to provide readers with an understanding of the source's argument before you respond to it or launch your own argument. So here we're going to look at an example of summarizing. So we have the original passage. Students frequently overuse direct quotation in taking notes, and as a result, they overuse quotations in the final research paper. Probably only about 10% of your final manuscript should appear as directly quoted matter. Therefore, you should strive to limit the amount of exact transcribing of source materials while taking notes. So this is a 3-sentence passage. And we're going to condense it to 1 sentence. Students should take just a few notes in direct quotation from sources to help minimize the amount of quoted material in a research paper. So again, a summary, you're taking a large chunk of text, whether it's an entire article, an entire chapter, a paragraph or 2, and you're condensing it, okay? It could be you're condensing an entire article to a couple of sentences, or you're going to condense a 15-page article to like a paragraph, but it's still condensed, okay? So, and if you want more information on summarizing, please refer to the lesson on how to write a summary. And also note that, when you summarize, you still need an in-text citation. So, it's one thing if you're summarizing an entire article, like you should contextualize that like through a signal phrase. But like if you're summarizing a page or a paragraph or a chapter, you still need to like have an in-text citation indicating like where or what you're summarizing and where that is in the original source. So now let's talk about paraphrasing. So, and I really don't want you all to get summarizing and paraphrasing confused, because they're, like I said, they're a little similar, but when you get down to it, they are very different. So when you're paraphrasing, you are restating your source's main points in your own words and using your own sentence structures. You should use approximately the same amount of words and details as your source. So essentially, paraphrasing, so let's say there's a paragraph that you want to paraphrase. You're going to use your own words to communicate the main idea of that paragraph to the reader of your essay. But it's different. A paraphrase is different from a summary, because in a summary, you would maybe communicate the main idea of a paragraph in a couple of sentences, but when you're paraphrasing a paragraph, you're basically going to write a paragraph yourself, okay? So, when to paraphrase. When the ideas and information are important, but the author's exact words are not needed. When you want to restate the source's ideas in your own words. When you need to simplify or explain a technical or complicated source. When you need to reorder a source's ideas. So, here are 6 steps to effective paraphrasing. Reread the original passage until you understand its full meaning. Set the original aside and write your paraphrase on a note card. Jot down a few words below your paraphrase to remind you later how you envision using this material. At the top of the note card, write a key word or phrase to indicate the subject of your paraphrase. Check your rendition with the original to make sure that your version accurately expresses all the essential information in a new form. Use quotation marks to identify any unique term or phraseology you have borrowed exactly from the source. Record the source, including the page, on your note card so that you can credit it easily if you decide to incorporate the material into your paper. So, going to this 5th point, you can paraphrase and include direct quotes at the same time, right? Like maybe you're writing a paraphrase or you're paraphrasing a paragraph, but there's a chunk of text that maybe you're having trouble putting in your own words, or you like the way the original source said it better. So you can paraphrase and then have a direct quote and then finish your paraphrase. Okay? And these steps are things you should do before you actually insert the paraphrase into your paper. My biggest tip for paraphrasing and summarizing is just don't look at the source. Turn it over and get out your note card or a separate sheet of paper or a separate Word document and try and work it out on your own. And then step 4 shows kind of compare and contrast to make sure you paraphrased it accurately and that you're not using the same language as your original source. And of course, paraphrasings should always have in-text citations. So let's look at this example that we looked at for writing summaries. Students frequently overuse direct quotation in taking notes, and as a result, they overuse quotations in the final research paper. Probably only about 10% of your final manuscript should appear as directly quoted matter. Therefore, you should strive to limit the amount of exact transcribing of source materials while taking notes. So we have 3 sentences here. So when you're paraphrasing, we should be using approximately 3-ish sentences, or maybe not the same amount of sentences, but the same amount of words, because you should have your own sentence structure as well. So let's look at an example. So this is a good paraphrase. In research papers, students often quote excessively, failing to keep quoted material down to a desirable level. Since the problem usually originates during note-taking, it is essential to minimize the material recorded verbatim. So this goes into a lot more detail than the summarized version of this passage. So it's very different, paraphrasing and summarizing. We kind of compare the summary. Students should take just a few notes in direct quotation from sources to help minimize the amount of quoted material in a research paper. And then the paraphrased version has a lot more detail in it, okay? But it's still your own words. So there is something called patch writing, which students often mistake as a way to paraphrase. And it's nothing there's nothing nefarious going on or sketchy going on. It's an honest misunderstanding of what paraphrasing is. So patch writing, and this is an example of patch writing, but patch writing is when you go word by word and just basically find a synonym. So students frequently overuse direct quotation in taking notes. Students often use too many direct quotations when they take notes, resulting in too many of them in the final research paper. So, students frequently overuse direct quotations in taking notes, and as a result, they overuse quotations in the final research paper. So it's like we're finding synonyms for words from the original text and just like replacing them. And then some of this language is exactly the same. But essentially patch writing is when you're just like going word by word and finding a synonym. It's kind of like a fill in the blank. Like if we were going to say that dog is huge, a patch written version of that would be that canine is large. You know, it's like, yeah, that's technically your own words, but it's not considered a paraphrase. So, you know, and I understand we're still learning. So as long as we have our like in-text citations and there's an honest effort to paraphrase, to summarize, to directly quote, like we can work with that and we can learn from that. But I really want everyone to be mindful of patch writing because honestly, when I was an undergrad and until I was actually took classes where it's like, this is how you paraphrase, yada, yada, yada. Like, that's what I thought paraphrasing was. And many people think that patch writing is, like, that's what paraphrasing is, but it isn't. Okay? So that pretty much covers everything. I do want to say, and this is in the rubric, but going to direct quotes, another thing with use direct quotes sparingly, do not quote giant chunks of text. You know, if you go to our rubric, you know, you're not allowed to use block quotes. You're not allowed to, you know, have more than 20% of your paper be direct quotes. Because in my experience with teaching, people will just toss in like a ton of direct quotes just to get to the page count. Okay? So please make sure you're using direct quotes sparingly. Please make sure you're reviewing the rubric and you're mindful of like what you can and can't do in your research paper. So that pretty much covers everything. Covers everything. Again, I highly recommend that you use these templates to help you insert your research into your paper, okay? Because that's going to, I think it's going to make the process a lot easier, especially if this isn't something you've done a lot. Like if you haven't written a lot of research papers or argumentative research papers, because that's the thing. It's like you need to make sure you're highlighting your argument and not just like regurgitating what your sources have said, because your reader can just go read the sources instead. All right. So as always, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out, and good luck.